Hello again, Lettuce Heads. I'm your host, Lettuce, and in our second episode, we will be learning about government cover ups and their implications. In August 2nd and the 4th of 1964, the USS Maddox allegedly engaged three North Vietnamese naval boats, and although these events produced no American casualties, Congress soon passed a resolution to allow President Lyndon B. Johnson to begin America's involvement in South Asia and the Vietnam War. The legitimacy of the attacks on the USS Maddox has been debated since nearly their announcement, and in 2005, the National Security Agency released documents that showed that the events on August 4th did not happen at all. While this evidence doesn't disprove any Vietnamese hostility to the U.S. naval vessels in their waters, or that the U.S. wouldn't have gotten involved in the Vietnam War without the Gulf of Tonkin incident, it does show that the government was and is okay with producing false information when it serves their purpose, and in this case, starting a war. In 1990, a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl going by the name Nariya testified before Congress saying that she witnessed Iraqi soldiers murdering children by pulling them out of their hospital incubators and leaving them to die on the ground. However, a later investigation discovered that PR magnate Hill and Knowlton arranged Nariya's testimony for their client, Kuwaiti-sponsored Citizens for a Free Kuwait. After the U.S.'s involvement in Iraq, Citizens for a Free Kuwait would go on to donate large sums of money to foundations tied to the committee that helped rig the testimony. Operation Northwoods was a covert operation approved in 1962 in order to build support for war in Cuba, aimed at wresting the nation from Fidel Castro. Declassified documents show that many considerations for the plan include quote-unquote funerals for mock victims, starting rumors about Cuba, and blowing up an American ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming Cuba. While Operation Northwoods was rejected by Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense for John F. Kennedy, the idea that the government would resort to terrorism on its own citizens to start a war is chilling. With that, we end Tier 1. Tier 1 today is focused on propaganda stunts by the government and other officials in high places in order to control the populace's thoughts on engaging in war. In 1920, the 18th Amendment, commonly referred to as Prohibition, banned sale, transportation, and manufacture of alcohol. While intended to curb the use of alcohol in the U.S., usage rates skyrocketed in the Prohibition era. In order to meet demand, bootleggers would often steal industrial alcohol made undrinkable by, normally, the inclusion of methyl alcohol. Chemists had learned to distill out the methyl alcohol, and bootleggers could then resell the stolen and previously undrinkable alcohol. However, in 1927, the U.S. government started adding much more dangerous chemicals to industrial alcohol. Kerosene, chloroform, and acetone are some examples, in order to make it truly undrinkable. While journalists tried to publicize the dangers of drinking the more dangerous alcohol, 1,100 people died in 1926 and 27 due to the poisonous alcohol. From 1954 to 1961, it is estimated that nearly 98 million people were inoculated with the polio vaccines contaminated with SV40, or simian virus 40, which is a carcinogenic. In 1961, fortunately, the federal government changed its rules for oral-type vaccines, specifically targeting the SV40 polio vaccine, making it unable to be administered. Unfortunately, however, the polio vaccine contaminated with SV40 continued to be given to patients until 1963, giving nearly 100 million people the inactive carcinogenic SV40. Tier 2 has focused on the idea that the government is okay with leaving in or adding poisons that will be administered to or used by a large population of their own country. In 1932, the Tuskegee Institute and the Public Health Service worked together to find a treatment plan for syphilis in the African American community, deciding on a 6-month experiment involving 399 men with syphilis and 201 without, and telling the patients that they would receive treatment. However, the researchers never provided aid for the patients, even when penicillin became the widely accepted treatment for the disease. Not only did research withhold the information that penicillin could help cure the disease, the experiment continued for 40 years, 80 times longer than the experiment was supposed to last. And in the end, the study was only stopped when a press article spawned an investigation and public outrage. MKUltra is the code name for a human research project in which the U.S. government and the CIA's Scientific Research Division collaborated to test the effects of torture, sensory deprivation, isolation, hypnosis, and most famously LSD on unknowing citizens of both the US and Canada. In order to obtain a large amount of human test subjects, the CIA paid off many hospitals and prisons, as well as enticing addicts with their drug of choice, in order to test on those who wouldn't be questioned if they went missing. However, in 1973, by order of CIA Director Richard Helms, all documents pertaining to the MK Ultra experiments were destroyed, and when investigated by Congress, no member of the CIA had any recollection of any events of MK Ultra. Although some documents have been released, a full timeline of the MK Ultra experiment. In Tier 3, we've learned more about the scientific side of these government cover-ups, but unlike Tier 2, we are discovering that the government is not only okay with leaving dangerous chemicals in commonly used items, but kidnapping, drugging, torturing, and even attempting to use mind control on not only their own citizens, but citizens of other countries as well. In 1985, the Reagan administration devised a plan to bring 7 American hostages back home. The plan was to sell armaments to Iran, who was currently under embargo, in return for the hostages. The plan derailed magnificently, but 5 of the 7 hostages were safely returned. Here's where things get interesting. With the funds procured by the arms sale, the Reagan administration funded anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua called the Contras. After a leak from an Iranian source in 1986, the Reagan administration firmly denied the allegations and underwent 41 days of congressional hearings. However, Reagan's involvement is still unclear, and the charges against his administration were forced to be dropped because many classified documents went unreleased. The secret mission, codenamed Project Azorian, was conducted in 1974, and its aim was to retrieve 3 nuclear-armed 1-megaton ballistic missiles from a sunken Soviet submarine. With President Nixon's approval, the operation was so classified that only a few high-ranking government officials had access to its files and goal. After being investigated in the forced declassification of many documents involving Project Azorian, it was found that the team responsible for resurfacing the sub was successful and had transported at least pieces of the sub to Hawaii. However, so much of the document's text is redacted that we have no idea what the actual level of success of Project Azorian is. In Tier 4, we've covered topics that are not only incredibly dangerous, like hauling armed nuclear warheads, but almost nothing could be done to punish those responsible due to classified information and the destruction of evidence. Today we've learned about many confirmed government cover-ups, from LSD-powered mind control to disappearing nukes to poisonous alcohol. While knowing what kinds of acts our government has committed, or in the case of Project Northwoods, only approved, is terrifying, the scariest part is that many of these topics were unearthed many years after their beginning. There very well could be several government activities of this scale occurring right now, or many other instances that will never be discovered.